everyone, welcome back. So glad to be here with you. Today we have with us Jay Watts. Jay, say hey to the people.
Hey, hey. Thank you
Hey,
for having me.
yes, thank you so much for being here. We are so glad that you've decided to join us. Jay, tell us a little bit about you.
Yes, so excited to be here in front of you all in a safe space. Hope everyone is happy and healthy and thriving. Again, I'm Jay, and I am a sex counselor, also a sex coach, and there are two different aspects, two different professions. Sex counselors are not psychotherapists, so we're not sex therapists. So I'm not a psychotherapist. I don't integrate a lot of mental health, although some, but I'm not allowed to do diagnostic. But we do a lot of healing modalities. I work very closely with OBGYN offices and urology offices to work with their therapy plans. And I also take just private clients as well too. A lot of the married couples, because when we're talking about this passion, pleasure, and purpose building and planning, that is really what I specialize in. Like, how do we regroup? How do we create a strong foundation in passion, pleasure, and purpose to be able to either build back up intimacy, recreate what intimacy ought to look like in a changing landscape for marriages and for couples and partners. So excited to be able to share some of my knowledge and expertise to support and strengthen units and marriages.
Thank you so much, because that is what our community is about: strengthening our marriages, growing together, really just understanding some things to help our spouses, help ourselves, help the marriage community at large. So today we are, as Jay said, talking about prioritizing passion, pleasure, and purpose in our marriage. But I do have a question, Jay, before we dive into this. As a sex coach, as a sex counselor, what is the number one question that you get asked?
Number one question I get asked, and particularly a lot from married couples, is how do I bring back my, desire and intimacy? How do I get it back? And I always say it's not necessarily getting back what was, it's knowing where you are at this point in time in your life and building from that point forward. Um, a lot of us aren't young whippersnappers anymore. Some of us have health concerns. Some of us are going through menopause. Some of us are going through moments in our life that have caused us stress and grief. On top of COVID-19 and COVID Omicron now, we're not necessarily in that space we were in if we were in our, teens or 20s, early 20s. Some of us are in different spaces and stages. As you mentioned, there's marital trauma that sometimes happens, and it's not necessarily getting back what was, it's building on what is. And that is often the top question. Even for individuals that are single, how do I get back what was? How do I have a better intimate life that mirrors what was? But I hope to shape and support and develop people into saying this is what is, and we can build upon that and create something potentially even greater than what was.
Great. All right. So let's dig in. Tell us a little bit more about your background, because some people before today may have not known that sex coaches, sex therapists even existed. There's a doctor for everything. There's a
There is.
doctor, doctors for our teeth, doctors for who work with physical therapy and chiropractors, all kinds of doctors. Maybe people didn't know this exists. So tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I'm gonna, share my slide really quick. I have just a little bit of information about my professional expertise. And as you can tell, I have a lot of schooling. Sometimes I look at it and I'm like, "Ooh, how did I do it?" It was the grace of God, to be honest, that has brought me through all these points in my life to be where I am. I did get a bachelor's degree in education from the University of Louisville and a master's in human services, where 98% of my coursework was in mental health therapy. I opted not to be a mental health therapist because my focus, I wanted to really hone in on, was not necessarily diagnostic, not necessarily being able to, be in a mental health capacity. I wanted to be in a sex counseling capacity, which is a little bit different. And I'll go a little bit more in depth with that later. So I got that from Eastern Kentucky. If you can tell a little bit by my accent, I am from Kentucky. I'm currently in Austin, Texas right now, and have a master's of cultural foundations of education from Kent State. And I'm almost finished with my doctorate in mental health with a focus in sex studies, where my focus is on the Black community and how sexual shame presents itself, especially when there's racialized stereotypes that often impact pleasure. So
Wow, wow.
yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, and hopefully you'll loop in some of that today. I think that's, some good considerations that many people haven't really thought about. So
Yes,
we're so glad for your expertise, and hopefully you can weave in some of that for us.
thank you.
All
Yes.
right.
Um, just also for clarification, there is a great difference between sex therapists and sex counselors, and sex coaches. I am a sex counselor and a sex coach. I'm not a sex therapist. Sex therapists often have a psychotherapy required background, meaning they are eligible to have diagnoses for mental health concerns. Often, if there's, for example, if there's severe trauma or other elements such as, a mental health concern, sometimes I'll refer to a sex therapist because of that mental health aspect. But people often come to me for strategies, support, being able to develop plans. And I work with urology offices and OBGYN offices as well too. Sex coaches often primarily only do the strategy. So they don't do the clinical side like I do. So I kind of couple both of them in. So just for very much a clear, definition, just in case you may have like some diagnosed anxiety or diagnosed depression, there's also people that do what I do that can also couple that in with your therapy as well too.
Great. That's great to know. Thank you so much.
No problem.
All right, so let's dig in a little bit. Today we're talking about passion, purpose, and pleasure.
Yes. It's so important because, I think of this as, my 3 Ps of intimacy. This passion and this pleasure is often what we kind of talk about primarily, when it comes to intimacy. But we often forget about that third tier, which is purpose. And to break it down a little bit further, passion is that strong desire for oneself and one's partner. And I added oneself too, because in order to love someone else, you have to also begin to love yourself as well too. And passion, that strong desire, really starts from within. And that passion is so essential. And often times when we're thinking about the courting stage or the dating stage before we get to marriage, that passion is strong, right? That, woo, this person's good looking, or woo, I'm so attracted to this person. The passion's there. You feel like a teenager again. And sometimes what happens as time progresses, that passion tends to wane. And it's a natural ebb and flow because sometimes life gets in the way. Sometimes there's marital trauma. Sometimes there's not a clear separation of almost like the business side to marriage and the personhood of marriage. And sometimes that blends and it prevents that passion from being able to be facilitated. But also that pleasure. What we often forget when it comes to intimacy, but it's so important, that satisfaction and that enjoyment, that joy attainment, that oftentimes, I grew up Southern Baptist. And when I learned about intimacy and sex, especially as a woman, I learned that it was my job as a woman to be the bearers of sex. That joy and passion and pleasure is not necessarily for me. It's for my partner.
Wow.
And not for me. So being able to really resituate what pleasure looks like is also something that's so important, because oftentimes we don't get that message. And I work with a lot of churches, when it comes to premarital counseling and support. And a lot of churches and a lot of religious organizations are starting to really be cautious about how they're labeling and how they're talking about pleasure and joy attainment when it comes to intimacy. That it used to be that women were the bearers versus not being able to enjoy it. And we know that if we want to preserve marriages, if we want to be able to, for women and men and anybody that any gender, to be able to really understand how to receive joy from each other, we have to be able to talk about that aspect without the shame attached to it.
Absolutely.
Yes. But that foundational principle, that purpose, like, what is the reason for being? What is the reason for existing? And oftentimes, we get that when it comes to marriages, right? The reason for existing, that unit, that being able to be together and to conquer together, to be able to heal together, support together, to be able to go through life and be able to move together in a space and a moment that hopefully is more than just existing, but that reason for being able to be. A lot of people have that purpose, but what's important about those 3 P's is that when there's not one, the rest of them are not able to be supported. Think of it almost like a chair. You're sitting and rocking in your chair, and you're in your kitchen, and if you have a leg on that chair that is not safe and sound, that's not put together great, you better not be rocking it. You end up falling on your tail. And these 3 P's very similar. When one of them is not strong, the rest of them are not able to withstand. So we know people that may have a strong purpose, they're together for a reason. They understand their purpose. They may have that passion. They may really desire each other. They desire to be together, but that pleasure's not there. No one taught them. They didn't have sex education. They didn't have conversations about what their body does and how they can achieve pleasure with each other and by themselves. Then sometimes it can cause some marital concerns. Sometimes it can cause a breach.
If I could add something, I was going to say, I'm really glad that you're talking about these all together, because sometimes a lot of people just think about sex or their sex life, their sex journey, and their mind goes straight to the passion, which is important, but they don't always think about the purpose. What's the purpose of this? And to your point, some people may think about pleasure, but only their spouse giving them pleasure or them giving their spouse pleasure. But we don't think about this all together. And when we started our series on marriage 2 years ago, the Marriage Toolbox series, the first session talked about the why of marriage. So a lot of times people think about their wedding, they may even think about certain elements of their marriage journey, but they don't always stop to think about the why. Why am I getting married? What is the purpose of marriage? Everything starts with a purpose, just like I do leadership development, and everything starts with mission in an organization. You have to know why you're there. You have to know what you're dedicating resources to, your time to. So that mission, that purpose is so important when we think about an organization, when we think about marriage, when we think about our sex life. It always starts with purpose, always starts with mission. So thank you so much for bringing this up, because I don't think you hear this conversation enough. You either hear about pleasure or you hear about passion, but we don't always think about the purpose. So walk us through these.
Yes. I intentionally put the 3 P's of intimacy for a reason. I didn't say 3 P's of sex. I said intimacy, because intimacy is about connection.
Absolutely.
Intimacy is about being able to emote together, being able to be in each other's midst and really enjoy one another. And that is in the presence of sex and also the absence of sex. So a lot of people, when they see my work, and they understand and they try to conceptualize it. They say, well, she's mainly just talking about, intercourse. She's mainly just talking about
Mhm.
things that are very erotic. Actually, no, not all the time.
Mhm.
Some of it is about sex. A lot of it, and 90% of
Intimacy.
it is about connection.
Sure.
And that's that intimacy. That's that being able to understand your partner's, love language. It's able to understand, like you mentioned, that purpose. Why are we existing together? What's the purpose? What's the reason? What is our reason? What is our mission? Where do we want to see ourselves? How can we grow together? How can we become our best selves together?
Mhm.
That's a purpose. Because we can all say, like, yeah, we're going to get married because this is what my parents did or what my parents did not do. Sometimes that becomes our purpose because it's what our parents did not do.
Mhm.
But is that going to be strong enough to withstand? So I always like to really get people to understand that purpose is probably the most important element of these three P's,
Mhm.
because that is really what's going to be your foundational reason for existing, and being able to say that those passion and pleasure aspects are important to prioritize.
Mhm.
So, purpose and sex within marriage. You know, biblically, we often talk about procreation for sex. Yeah, I grew up with two very conservative grandparents that they did not sleep in the same bedroom.
Mm.
They only really came together for procreation, and they had 12 kids.
Wow.
So it happened. It happened. But they were very ultrally conservative when it came to sex, and especially about the procreation aspect. But we know that sex can also be a form of connection within marriage. We can also know that it can be part of healing and a release, especially, when couples they bicker and they fight, and that release can also be a very intimate one as well too, to be able to reconnect. But also some recreation, because yes, connection's great, healing and release is great, but sex doesn't have to be work. Does not have to be a purpose to release or to connect. It can be just to enjoy each other in the moment, to exist, to have a good time with each other. And sometimes we miss that in relationships. Just the act of existing and enjoying each other's presence.
Enjoying that. And I'll
Yes.
add to this too that sex is really a tangible earthly example of the oneness that Christ desires with us. So it is the closest form of intimate you could be with someone. And intimacy happens in many ways. We talked about that. You mentioned that a few minutes ago. But it is the closest, most tangible earthly example that God has given us in a marriage relationship to mirror oneness with him, because for everything, every spiritual lesson he gives us a tangible earthly example, and that's the closest form that he's given us. So it's definitely to be enjoyed. It's a god-given area of our marriage, and we know that marriage is god-given. So absolutely, God does not give us anything that he doesn't want us to enjoy.
Yes. And that, although that's amazing that you all believe this 100%, but unfortunately there's still a lot of sexual shame when
Mm.
it comes to, and it sometimes is pushed in to marriages, especially about sex. There's a lot of messaging about sex, that sex is evil, that sex should be something that you're not enjoying unless you're procreating.
Mm.
So I love the fact that you're reframing this into a moment that this is something that is God ordained for you to enjoy. Because
We're
that
taking
also,
evil off the table
yeah,
today. If you've been given that messaging, and many people have, to your point, we're
yes,
freeing you of that today. You
yes,
won't, you won't find that in the Bible that it's evil. You can free yourself of that today and enjoy it.
yes, you can free yourself of that. And being able to free yourself is so essential for being able to achieve a passionate and a pleasureful life. But I totally agree that being able to connect with your partner in a way that's beautiful, that's something that you all can enjoy together, is something that is one spiritually and God ordained, something that would allow you all to be able to create something that is good for you all, that would allow for healing to take place, to allow for connection. But also, like I mentioned, sex should not be work. Like, oh, here we go again. Oh, I guess I'll put this on my schedule so we can get back to it. Something that you all can enjoy.
Enjoy.
And sometimes that's missed along the way. And sometimes, especially for couples that have not had intimacy in a long time, I've worked with couples that haven't had intimacy in 10 years.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So even touching each other is almost jarring, you know? It's like I'm not used to touching my partner. We sleep in different rooms. We're just not there. But getting back to those moments where you can enjoy each other's presence, wow, that's transformational. That's beautiful. That's a unit, that's a connection. And that's a great purpose of not just sex in marriage, but just marriage in general, to enjoy each other, to not just exist just for the sake of existing, but to enjoy. But also passion in marriage, that other P, passion. You know, when I talk to couples and they say, well, how can I get my passion back for my partner? How can I get my passion back for my spouse? Keep dating your spouse. Keep dating them. Realize that the person that you're rocking with for years may have some changes within themselves, within their careers, within their bodies, but they're that person that you married, that you decided to spend your life with. Keep dating them, keep learning about them. And when I say dating, keep learning about them. Because as time progresses, they're going to evolve as people. Their desires are going to change, their passions are going to change. They may be more curious about certain things when it comes to intimacy. And with that, it sometimes takes some learning. But also, another factor about passion, healing together. Sometimes it's easy for people to go their separate ways when they're going through a moment, to close the door on being able to work on it together, or to go to your mama or your best friend or your cousins and not each other. That creates that division and that depletes passion, because deep inside you're like, well, why can't they come to with me? Like, why can't they come heal with me? Why can't they come to me? And that's important when it comes to passion, to know that you can trust the person that you're with, even at your worst moment and at your best moment. The ultimate form of passion is that trust. But go on to that communication. In order to have passion, in order to truly desire one another, then you have to be able to have great communication. It
Absolutely.
doesn't have to be perfect. You all are going to change in communication styles. Communications styles evolve over time. The way one communicated 3 years ago may not be the same way they communicate from that point forward. Traumas can get in the way, parenthood can get in the way, jobs can get in the way. So being able to develop a communication that is good for you all, not based on probably what was. Your communication style would be different probably before you had kids to now having kids and potentially grandkids. That communication style is going to be different. So being able to learn to evolve those communication styles is essential for passion. especially communicating about needs and desires. Now, a lot of people are afraid to talk about, like, I enjoy being with my partner, but I've never achieved orgasm with them, never achieved any type of pleasure with them. Well, let's communicate about that. Let's be able to talk about it. Learn your love languages: passion, desire, not just the love language of your partner, but also the love language of yourself, because that allows you to advocate for your needs, but also knowing your partner will also allow you to know, like, hey, maybe my partner never liked me getting them a gift every time I made them upset. I've been used to giving gifts all these years and never knew that they didn't want the gift. They just wanted quality time.
Mhm.
They wanted words of affirmation. So I'm sitting here spending thousands of dollars on jewelry and purses and Birkins when all they just wanted was my time. Wow, that's how passion can also be recreated.
Mhm.
And I will say the creator of the love languages book is a Baptist preacher, so it is foundationed in Christian theology as well too. Learn together. Sometimes we learn separately. I often get clients that come to me in silos. So
Mm.
the wife will come to me and say, I need help.
Mm.
My partner is not able to do this for me. I'm wanting to get some help. Why don't you invite your partner to the session? Learn together.
Mm.
Because learning in silos does not build passion. And sometimes it doesn't have to do with anything when it comes to sex, when it comes to learning together. Sometimes it's learning together. A hobby, having a book club with each other instead of like with friends, with each other. They call it sapiosexual. The really being attracted to someone's mind and knowledge. Learning together can build that passion, being able to grow together. That could also be, especially spiritually, could be going through a religious text together, whether it's the Bible. And they have Bibles for couples as well too, with activities to be able to build together and to grow together, learn together, have your own thing. So as much as you need to be together, have your own thing, have your own friends, be able to go out without your partner. Because they say the absence makes the heart grow fonder. It can, of course, in small doses, not big doses. But being able to have your own thing, have your own hobbies, and be able to support each other in each other's own hobbies is important. Sometimes what happens in relationships is everyone becomes like it's one identity. You know, I like the same thing that my partner likes. I go everywhere my partner goes. So your identity ends up only being your partner.
Mhm.
But that passion can be increased by having your own thing.
And can I speak to this also? Two
Yeah.
things that really jumped out at me on here. Number one is communication has come up in every session that we've ever had, ever. So for those of you who are still holding back on communication with your spouse, it will come up in finances, it comes up in child rearing, it comes up in working through trauma, it comes up in sexuality. So you can't get away from communication. Communicate. And communication does not only happen in one way. You'd be
Yep.
surprised all of the ways that you can communicate with your spouse and what it opens up. But I will say, when couples are communicating well, it influences everything for the better, including your sex life. The second thing is there's no exact recipe for this last thing, but I agree with you, Jay. It's important to have your own thing. And so you will learn in marriage, whether you're newlyweds or if you've been together years and years, there's something about having your own thing. Now, I will say, for example, Clamore and I, we do lots of things together. We love just doing certain things together, traveling, many things. However, ladies, your husband may not want to come to your book club or whatever your thing is. He may not want to talk to you about certain topics. You've got to have that balance of healthy things that you share with your friends or family, and then things that you share with your spouse. It's okay if your book club is the thing that you all do not share together. It does not mean that you're not one. Clamore and I have a saying that we say, you do have to be one. We believe in being one in marriage, but be one where it matters. Sharing toothpaste, that doesn't have to be the thing that you're one on. You've got to have your own thing. If sports is his thing or something else, or sports are your things, ladies, it's okay to have a healthy dose of time apart where you can recharge, regroup, enjoy something, and then talk about it later, maybe on a lighter scale that the person can just appreciate it at a high level without having to do that particular thing with you. That's okay too. There's no exact recipe, but again, with everything in marriage, the Holy Spirit has to lead and guide you into all truth, including when to give your spouse some space so that when you come together, it's even more wonderful and you can talk about it and appreciate the other person's differences.
Yes, all of that. I think that was so wonderfully put. Because yes, it's so important to support one another. We know that a lot of times when passion wanes, sometimes the foundation is the lack of support somewhere, whether it's financial support, emotional support, whether it's support in the household when it comes to kids. Sometimes that can be a foundational underlying reason. But I will say that having your own thing is great practice in one, supporting each other's passions, supporting each other separately. So you can mirror what that looks like at home. Mm-hmm. To be that champion for one another, even without that person having to be that center. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Pleasure, which tends to be what people think is the primary issue. Mm-hmm. People come to me and say, pleasure is the issue, when really passion may have been the issue. So pleasure, especially how to increase it in a marriage. Again, communication. You don't know what you don't know. And sometimes we're so pleasure performance driven. Mm-hmm. And we want to please our partners, especially women. Sometimes we will say, hey, really want to please our partner, so I don't want them to feel self-conscious. So I'm not going to really tell them that I'm not enjoying the experience. I don't want them to feel bad. So I'm going to continue to not have something pleasurable happen. Well, communication is important. And then there's ways you can communicate that you're desiring more, that is not shame-provoking, that doesn't come up in arguments. So sometimes what happens is there's this culminating moment in an argument, and then something is blurted out. Well, that's why I haven't been enjoying you for the past 5 years.
If I could put a pin there, I will say we've talked about that a lot in the 3 series, talking about things that are vulnerable and not using someone's vulnerability in a moment where you're using it as a weapon. Yes. So talking about things that are important and critical in times when they're not sensitive, and then never taking your spouse's sensitive information and using it against them as aha, I told you so. I'm going to use this in a moment of weakness. Never doing that. But again, family, here's communication. It's showing up again. It shows up in every area. So it is definitely worth talking about. Find ways to communicate in times that are not heightened, in times where you're not angry. Maybe during pillow talk, or maybe if y'all are having a nice dinner by yourselves and you want to share some things. Timing is important. The context of what you say and how you say it is important. Your tone, it matters. All of it matters, especially going back to love languages. If your spouse has a words of affirmation love language, especially, but even if they don't, no one wants to have something thrown up in their face or have the feeling that it's thrown at them in a moment of weakness. So thank you
Yeah,
for sharing that.
no problem. And thank you for affirming that, because when that happens, that not only depletes pleasure,
Trust. Yeah.
but it depletes passion,
Mm.
which makes you question your purpose.
Mm.
So
It's
you
all connected.
see, it's all connected. So we have to be mindful of that. I say, just to even go a little bit further with what you said, which was so amazing and spot on, I will say there are spaces you need to avoid having conversations about these things.
Can you talk about that for a moment? Just take a few
Yeah.
seconds to talk about that. Talk about that.
Yes. So what tends to happen, especially when you're cohabitating with someone, is we want to shelter. If we have kids, we want to shelter arguments from kids. So it happens where?
In the room.
In the bedroom. So what tends to happen is there's that negative energy associated with the bedroom, because that's where arguments are. So how are you supposed to have a pleasurable experience in a space that also is your go-to for arguments? I said, don't bring your arguments to the bedroom.
Absolutely. I agree with that. I agree with that.
Yes. If you want pleasure and passion to continue to be facilitated, choose another location.
Mm-hmm. And that's not to say that's the only place you can be
Yes.
intimate also, but it is to say people tend to be intimate there. People tend to argue there.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. We've
Yes.
talked about that in some other episodes as well. Yes.
Yeah, you can be intimate anywhere in your house or wherever. But I will say, your bedroom is sacred. For both of you all, lay your head down for some serenity, for some calmness.
Mm-hmm.
Where intimacy often happens, but of course doesn't have to happen there. But if it's your primary space that's supposed to be calm,
Mm-hmm.
avoid having those moments in the bedroom. And I say, even outside of sex, when you're having tough conversations with your kids, don't do it in their bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
Because then they start to associate their space of where they lay their head down with grief, with stress. That's why we tend to sometimes see kids have trouble sleeping after issues. The energy, that negativeness, it festers in the air. Find a different space. It's important because we want to make sure that the bedroom, which tends to be that space where you come in and as you are, is a space of love, a space of comfort.
Mm-hmm.
And it allows for pleasure to be facilitated. If you know that that area is space of love and calm, then that's your space. I'll also say pleasure mapping. To increase pleasure in your marriage, you have to know what makes your partner, what makes your husband, wife, or partner feel joy and excitement. So pleasure mapping is very intentional discovery of one's body. And so not just your body, but your partner's body as well too. You may discover parts of your partner's body and parts of your own body that you never knew was pleasurable until you do a mapping session. So literally gridding out your body from your head down to your toes with your partner to discover new spaces that will be interesting to enjoy. Innovation and exploration. Sometimes we're used to doing it the same way. We do it in the bedroom only. We do it missionary style and doggy style. Go to bed. Let's change it up. I often, especially for folks that have been going through the motion for years and doing it the same way, I often suggest a spice it up jar. And this is something you can do at home. So I'm going to tell you how to do it at home. So you can take either a mason jar, you can use a bowl, or something that you can put little slips of paper in. Choose 3 color Post-it notes. I like pink, yellow, and green because they're easy to find at the Dollar Tree. I love the Dollar Tree, y'all. And those 3 colors, you are going to work together to have a conversation on things that you all always wanted to try, explore, and learn. Try, explore, learn. So try are things that you all agree, so there's consent there. So if someone doesn't want some type of form of sex that you're not comfortable with, you're not going to add that on the slip of paper. So you all are going to add those on your whatever color you designate is your try. Explore. So your explore would be new ideas, new strategies that you want to explore on your partner's body. Again, consensual. So you all are having those conversations, putting on slips of paper. And learn things that you all want to learn together on other slips of paper. It could be the yellow Post-it notes. You'll flip them over, you'll put them in your basket or your mason jar. And once or twice, or how many times you want to do it a week, you're going to pull out 3 slips of paper at random and be able to spice it up. Something that will be different than what you all are used to.
I was going to say, I think the pleasure mapping and the jar are great challenges. Each of these sessions, we've thrown out a challenge to our community. So I think that the jar and also the pleasure mapping are 2 great challenges that we want to throw out to you guys. Thanks, Jay.
Yes. And also last, seek the support of a sex counselor and a sex coach. It is totally okay to ask for help. If you all are in a space where you just don't know what to do, busy work schedules, a lot of kids, or maybe there's waning testosterone. Maybe it's menopause. Maybe you're having painful intercourse. It is totally okay to ask for help. And that's important when it comes to pleasure in a marriage. Being able to communicate. So back to that top 1, communication. When you need help. And sometimes it's okay to solicit the support of someone else that has an expertise in it. So have some, these are just ways to contact me. Feel free to reach out to me anytime you may have some questions, especially what I went over. But Kasha, do you have any questions or follow-up that you want to add?
This was perfect. I was going to say, since we are in this space now, if the people want to reach you and you've provided your email, and this is your web address at the top?
It is. It's the cesw.com.
Perfect. So we look forward to our community reaching out to you. For those who did not know that this type of professional existed, they are here for you. We've talked to you all about therapy, about counseling in other areas, whether it was financial, mental health. There's sex counseling available. Take advantage of that. Jay, we appreciate it. Thank you for the insight. So nice having this conversation with you. Thank you for rounding out our series. We hope that you all will check out the other topics in our session. We've talked about pornography and the impact on marriage, sex and spirituality, sexual expectations, techniques, ghosts in the bedroom, the 5 sex needs of men and women. You all come back to the series, check out our other sessions. Jay, thank you so much for being here today. Great conversation. All right, have a good one. Thanks.
Bye, y'all.